Boy, oh boy, we have had ourselves yet another wild week of fantasy football action here. I'm coming at you fresh off of a Sunday slate of game and going to break down some of my biggest takeaways from this past week's matchups, talking through some of the key, obviously, difference makers and lineups throughout this week, and then project some stuff going forward here for Week 16, the divisional round of your fantasy postseason, and then obviously moving forward into championship week after that, or potentially based off your format, maybe you've got 3 more weeks of your fantasy season. Regardless, though, we're talking through 10 topics in today's episode, so kick back, relax, smash that like button on today's episode, and let's get started. All right, the first thing I want to talk through here is a couple of things stemming from the San Francisco 49ers defense. So first and foremost, if you have a fantasy player rostered that is going up against this defense the rest of the way this season in any of their 3 matchups, this is my number one most feared team right now. Now, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, they had solid floors in this week's games. It wasn't an absolute, domination, but I do still have a high level of respect for what Seattle's offense has been able to do this year. I'm not ready to just jump on the boat of abandoning Geno Smith and saying that his whole season was kind of fluky here, because he really has put some great football on tape, on display, and this Seattle offense is fairly talented. They did get a lot better. Their offensive line protection, especially if it was any worse, San Francisco would have really mopped them in this game. So a lot of things going into this take here. It's kind of all over the place, but essentially, if you're Las Vegas in championship week here, Washington, or as a Arizona the rest of the way, I've got concerns, and especially for that Cardinals team, because of course you've got Colt McCoy in there as a backup. So first and foremost, that's the number one thing I did want to address here, is that this team could be your fantasy death sentence if you do have some critical players in your lineup in this matchup. I could easily see in the Washington game Terry McLaurin having struggles, of course, like I said, for Arizona, Hollywood Brown, James Conner, and of course DeAndre Hopkins. That's a red flag for them there. Las Vegas in that championship game, you've got Devontae Adams and Josh Jacobs. So some pretty big time production placeholders in your lineups could be in for some scary situations here. But again, the next step forward, I did want to talk through that Seattle team a little bit. If you put into context the fact that Geno Smith threw the football 44 times and only scored 13 points, having 238 yards passing, that shows you what this team does. There are only a handful of defenses. Actually, there's a couple defenses, we'll put it at that, every year that really make a difference in fantasy scoring and really shut down opposing teams. And this has certainly been one of those teams this year. So I just want to kind of give them their props here, acknowledge my fear of matchups against this team going forward, which has been an ongoing problem for some time now, but especially in these pivotal matchups, I hope for you that your matchup is not against the San Francisco 49ers defense. Next up here, this is a broad takeaway, and obviously this happens every single year, but injuries happen, and they happen at inopportune times. It's never a good time for your player to get injured, and it sucks, man. I mean, having guys like Jonathan Taylor, Tyler Lockett getting injured really will affect teams going forward the rest of the way this season. Guys get nicked up. It totally sucks. I mean, for JT to get injured on his first touch of the game against Minnesota, literally lost teams playoff games this week, even if their team did good, potentially, because of what could be on the other side of that matchup. Simply starting a guy like Jawan Johnson on the opposing team and having his tight end outscore you by 15 and losing JT is almost, an insurmountable mountain to overcome here. So a lot of stuff obviously equates to winning fantasy football championships, but at the end of the day, bad luck and stuff like this JT injury can really be killer, because even if you go out there and get a Zach Moss or a Deion Jackson, by the way, check out our waiver wire episode live right now, those guys aren't going to replicate what JT could do on any given touch. So lots of impactful stuff unfolds and has a fallout from that situation. Next up here, the Browns offense. I did want to talk through this. So despite the fact that Cleveland wasn't super productive offensively, they didn't have a good day scoring. There is some context behind that. I think this team took a lot of steps forward. Deshaun Watson particularly looked like he was more in rhythm. He looked more comfortable in the pocket. He was breaking sacks and evading pressure at times, which was really nice to see. And the other thing was, at least while I was tuned into that game, I watched Cade York miss back-to-back field goals. There may have been other missed opportunities to score in that contest. So There was points left hanging on the board for Cleveland here. They had the opportunity to potentially cross the 20-point threshold, and the weather wasn't very optimal in that game either. It was windy, it was snowing, there was a lot of stuff going on. So for Deshaun Watson, I think that this directly impacts at least 3 pass catchers. Of course, Nick Chubb as well. If this team is moving the football, he's going to have more opportunities to score. But Donovan Peoples-Jones, man, has he stepped up to potentially being a high-ceiling flex play in some deeper leagues. Amari Cooper, as he continues to get healthier here, he could have his ceiling elevated if you're still kicking in your fantasy league after surviving the last 2 weeks. That's good news. And then David Njoku, who continued getting red zone targets this week and end zone targets, which are big as well. Passes thrown to you actually in the 10-yard by 33.5 yards wide box that scores 6 fantasy points. That's a big deal as well. So lots of stuff that I'd like to see from this offense, and I'm hoping and I'm optimistic going forward the next couple of weeks here. Mark Andrews, now back to the negative side of things here. He has been completely unreliable in fantasy. Now, it's been this way for some time, but I've been clinging on to hope here that the number 1 tight end from a season ago could bounce back, get back on track, and find a way to have success down the stretch of this season. But I've kind of come to the acceptance that might not happen and is unlikely to happen here. This Ravens offense just doesn't have a pulse in their offensive passing game. Between Tyler Huntley at backup quarterback, obviously filling in for Lamar Jackson, and we'll see. Things could change here if Lamar can actually return this week. I've heard rumors and reports about it. Not a guarantee at this point in time whatsoever, but between the fact that you're on your second quarterback here and that you literally do not have another respectable name or pass catcher that is not a tight end on this roster, it doesn't demand any respect from the defense. So they can center all their attention on taking Andrews away, stopping the run game, and then you see how this offense combusts upon itself, turns the ball over, Huntley fumbles, interceptions. Everything just seems to go to shit week after week for this Ravens offense in the Lamar Jackson injury-riddled situation. So it's not necessarily anyone's problem here. I kind of just sounded like I called Lamar Jackson injury-prone. Not what I was trying to say there, but at the end of the day, this has had devastating effects on Mark Andrews. If you think back to last season and how Andrews did with Tyler Huntley, my main takeaway from that situation versus now is that in 2021, he had Rashad Bateman and Hollywood Brown. This year, he's got Deshaun Jackson, Devin Duvernay, and James Prochet. So, big difference there, of course, and we're seeing the devastating effects of that. Raheem Mostert here. This is one that, kind of shocked me. But Raheem Mostert has the chance to be a league-winning or extremely high-level difference-making running back the rest of the way this season. He was a man on a mission here, going 17 rushing attempts for 136 yards against Buffalo in a game that wasn't really crappy weather conditions until mid-fourth quarter when it started coming down, and then we had to listen to Mark Sanchez call it a snow globe game about 47 times, which that dude needs to be reeled in a little bit on his broadcast. He was all over the place in that one. But sorry, no hate, Mark Sanchez. Maybe some hate towards Mark Andrews for what he's done to some of my fantasy lineups here. Just kidding. But at the end of the day, Raheem Mostert coming out here, being incredibly efficient. He is so explosive. If Mike McDaniel can just lock it into his brain, and this is honestly asking a lot here, but if he can just run the ball with Mostert 15 times a game. With his efficiency, his game-breaking speed, he could go out there and deliver some serious ceiling value. Now, context. Jeff Wilson was out in this game. However, Raheem has been outworking him the past couple of weeks here. We immediately after that trade for Jeff saw kind of a running back switch. It was Jeff right away. Now that's kind of pulling back here. Again, health reasons. He was unable to go on Sunday night. Mostert has definitely made up for the difference here in his absence. D'Onta Foreman now. This is a guy that is losing lineup dependability for me in leagues right now. D'Onta Foreman has laid a couple of consecutive games here that are very concerning, and I think that there is really troubling indicators written all over this one. So he had 7.5 points in half PPR scoring if we go back to week 14. That's fine. It's not great. He had 21 rushes for 74 yards, though, against Seattle. That's the problem. When you're averaging just barely over 3 yards per carry in one of the best fantasy matchups for opposing running backs, one of the defenses that's been worst against opposing rushing attacks, that's where the problems come. And Chuba Hubbard was more efficient in that game. He was more reliable. And then Chuba comes out this week. They both sucked again, or on the ground running the football. It was 10 rushing attempts for 9 yards for Foreman. It was 10 yards on 4 carries for Chuba. But Chuba added almost 60 yards in the receiving game on just 3 catches. So showing his explosiveness, his more so dynamic ability. I don't think Chuba Hubbard's a great pass catcher, but he still was able to contribute significantly more in that area of the game. If this continues going forward here, you're going to see more Chuba Hubbard snap count percentage, just his playing time increasing here, and D'Onta Foreman's decreasing. And we've already seen Foreman's role in the red zone decrease a little bit here as Blackshear is getting involved, and so is Chuba in that space. So there's a lot of troubling factors here. I think that the time, D'Onta Foreman has definitely peaked out, at least from my perspective this season. So if you can afford to have other lineup options, if you started him this week, you might not even have the choice to make this decision next week. But if you started him, somehow overcame it, we're looking forward next week as, potentially entertaining some other options here. Jerick McKinnon, this is now back on the positive side of things. This is my lesson learned for this week. He clearly appears to be the most dynamic and explosive player at the running back position in this Chiefs offense. Andy Reid just doesn't like committing to the run game, and I guess at the end of the day, that's fine because Jerick McKinnon's put up back-to-back 28-plus point games, and that is completely absurd. He has had 182 receiving yards combined in his last 2 games, and has had 8 targets in week 15 here and 9 targets in week 14. You're getting 17 targets at the running back position over a 2-game stretch of time. It clearly appears that they're shifting this way in the backfield. So if they want to keep doing this going forward, you're going to have absolutely no complaints from me. I mean, I liked Isaiah Pacheco. He runs hard, plays physical, nasty football, but McKinnon is so explosive and reliable out of the backfield. When Mahomes checks the ball down, he is frequently wide open and has a whole lot of space to run because teams are playing, 2 high safeties, or they're just sitting back because they don't want him to bomb the ball downfield. So I missed this one this week. I was the Pacheco guy, wanting to start him as a safe option here. And McKinnon, for the second consecutive week, I kind of chalked last week up to being a situational use on kind of fluky, and he comes out here and completely blows my socks off for, again, a second consecutive week here. Travis Etienne, now talking through another thing, a troubling trend that I'm noticing with Travis here, and as someone who personally has been incredibly bullish on Travis Etienne this season, you could consider this a strong lesson learned on my behalf here. But essentially, for Travis Etienne, there is a legitimate and a troublingly frequent fumbling problem with Etienne, who I looked back has lost 5 fumbles on the season. That is unacceptable for coaching staffs. If there's anything at a base surface level to take away from that, coaches, above anything else, hate turnovers and self-inflicted issues, and clearly ball security has been a problem for Travis Etienne. This drives coaches nuts, and if you're trying to get less touches in a football game, you turn the ball over. Now, Etienne's had his great explosive runs. He's been very efficient at times this season, but another thing that I'm seeing is some struggles to break contact immediately at the line of scrimmage. And these things coupled together, maybe the Jags bring in someone in the offseason. This is more so a long-term 2023 perspective lesson learned here, but there's, a really solid chance that the Jags might want to bring in a competent number 2 change of pace back where, you usually think of that in terms of someone who comes in and adds a little bit of an explosive element to the offense. They might bring in someone that offers some physicality because in the goal line, in the red area, he has been ineffective. You're talking about a guy who getting touches inside the 5-yard line, hits the offensive line, it's like a brick wall. The guy stops moving, doesn't turn the legs and get forward momentum. It's concerning, again, to my eyes. Also, number 3 concern I'm seeing here with Travis Etienne. The passing numbers aren't what I expected them to be in terms of his backfield usage and involvement here. So this is a guy who I think is kind of coming up short of the line in my standard of expectations, which is quite high for him. But that's what we get to do here when we've got a former first-round draft pick that brings a complete tool set to the table here. I'm expecting RB1, top 12 level things here with a top 5 ceiling, and that just isn't happening. He had a really good stretch, like a month long in the middle of the season, and it's tapering off here since. Now, I know he went over 100 yards this week, ended up cleaning up his performance a little bit here, but I'm continually seeing the same thing happen over and over again every week with the lack of contact breaking attempts here, the ineffectiveness in the red zone, the lack of receiving involvement, and the fumbling. Again, 5 lost fumbles in the season so far. He could lose more throughout the rest of the season. All stuff that worries me just a little bit here. Next up here, this is a super positive. Once again, tip of the cap to Justin Fields here. He is, next season needs to be among the top quarterbacks drafted in fantasy football. You've got guys like Jalen Hurts going to surge up boards. Of course, Fields, I think, should be amongst that group as well. He might be the most athletic quarterback I have ever seen. And now maybe there's someone from like the 1960s that I haven't, paid too much attention to, since clearly I'm not from that era. But the way that this guy moves, his lateral agility and athleticism, his straight line, open field speed, and then just his size, like how difficult it is for guys to tackle him. There was a play today where Justin Fields, I think it was either 2 or 3 defensive linemen, I thought had him dead to rights in the backfield for a sack, and he escapes, breaks more tackles, spins out of everything here, weaves and winds his way all the way downfield for what at the time looked like a touchdown. No, he stepped out at like the 4-yard line, but it was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen a quarterback do, and that includes guys like Lamar Jackson, Michael Vick. He is the 3rd quarterback. I believe the other 2 guys are the 2 in this. Lamar Jackson is for sure in this discussion, but he was the 3rd quarterback to ever break the 1,000-yard marker in a single season for rushing yardage. He does some completely nuts stuff out there. Now, he has a lot of work to do to refine his passing game, but holy cow, can this guy contribute a whole lot as a rushing threat. And with Chicago, the state of their franchise, they're going to continue having negative game scripts. And even if they do find themselves in a situation where they are leading and playing much better football, I've noticed that, this is just their identity. This is something they want to continue doing, and I think they should take full advantage of your athletic quarterback here. So again, just tipping my cap to him here. Basically, he is one of the most, physically impressive quarterback prospects that I think I've ever seen. Like I said, speed, he might be faster straight line than Lamar Jackson. He's not nearly quite as elusive, but he has, size that Lamar just doesn't have and can't bring to the table. Obviously, both of these guys have garbage for their offensive weaponry, but hopefully they can tool up a bit this offseason and get a little bit better here. Finally, J.K. Dobbins, I talked through him a little bit last week, but once again, he impressed me. Now, there is a clear and evident situation where, and the poor guy tweeted about it, I think that we're just abusing him in the community right now, whether it's Ravens fans blaming him for losses or fantasy football players just bitching and moaning that he's not getting these breakaway runs. But he's like, I promise, guys, I'll get my speed back. I'll get these breakaway runs, because he's not right now. He's getting caught from behind multiple times on film. Now, he's still being grossly efficient in a good way. He's being incredibly effective with the ball in his hands, but he should be doing more. This Ravens blocking scheme, if there's anything that isn't broke about this offense right now, it's their run game. It's schemed up very well, and they're creating lanes for JK to run. And he's clearly and evidently still the most explosive running back in this offense and on this roster right now. But there's another gear, or maybe even 2, that he can get to here once he's fully healthy. Hopefully that comes in the 2023 season. But for me right now, the takeaway is that this guy belongs in lineups. If you look at the schedule here going forward, this is a situation where J.K. Dobbins just needs to be considered for lineups. He's got Atlanta and Pittsburgh the next couple of games here, and just taking into account what he can do on an efficiency basis, the fact that this Baltimore team still has little to no passing game, and therefore they are incredibly dependent on this run game, he brings a lot to the table as a solid and quality running back too, especially as some other names are starting to trend down our rankings here after watching the past few games as well. So there you guys have it, our 10 takeaways here from Week 15 Fantasy Football. As always, if you enjoyed, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel here, and stay tuned for a future episode. As I touched on already in today's video, the waiver wire episode is out and live on the channel, so check that out after you're done watching this video. There's some stuff in here that kind of tails off of some of the comments made in today's episode, and hopefully you guys can find that information useful as we move forward into the week with tiers and rankings, must-start players. We'll be talking through a lot of stuff here. One more time, I may have said this in today's episode, maybe not. Follow me on Twitter if you haven't yet. So there's a link in the description. It's at Sizzle Fantasy. I'll be tweeting out some other waiver wire information, and obviously as we get injury-related news and all kinds of other stuff throughout this week. So thanks so much, you guys. I will see you in the next video. Peace out.